Hello, everyone, and welcome to a WEDI Emerging Technology Workgroup Spotlight, AI Awareness, Making the Invisible Visible. Before we begin, a special thanks to our Emerging Technology Workgroup co-chairs, Dino Jarosis with AMA, Gary Singh with Edifex, and the gentleman that I'm introducing now from STEDI, Nick Radoff.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. and Thank you, Michael. Yes, my name is Nick Radov, and I am one of your WEDI Emerging Technology Workgroup co-chairs. And today, for our session, I have the honor of introducing Mr. Tom Mort. He's a principal product manager at Vine Dental, and he also wears another hat within NDEDIC. That's the National Dental EDI Council, which is in some ways kind of a sister organization to WEDI. And so within NDEDIC, he's a chair person of the board within that organization and also chair of their AI opportunities work group. So we've asked him to come today and talk about some of the exciting work that NDEDIC has been doing to bring together the worlds of AI and EDI, specifically in the dental space, to help those interactions between payers and providers. And so, for those of you that aren't familiar with NDEDIC, I'd encourage you to also check that out. It's a good group, and they've got a lot of activity going on recently as well. So, with that, I'll turn it over to you, Tom.
Thank you so much. And I will try to share my screen here. Are people able to see?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. So thanks again, Nick. Yep, just wanted to say again that we appreciate the opportunity to work with WEDI and very much akin in kind of the NDEDIC organization and WEDI organizations and their goals that are out there. So today I'll kind of give a brief overview of who NDEDIC is, what areas we focus on, and then I'll focus a bit on the what AI is, how it's impacting dental in some ways, and what our work group went into to try to solve, and what we continue to work on, and how you can participate in that. So who is NDEDIC? NDEDIC stands for the National Dental EDI Council. It was started in 1990. The gentleman who started it also started NCPDP. So both of them started out in Arizona, and very much an organization geared towards an industry to try to solve technical problems. And the first thing that they did was say, look, as an industry, we need to be able to communicate. So it's an organization within the dental industry that focuses on being able to bring in membership from anybody, whether that's provider or payer or clearinghouse or practice management system, other consultants. Anyone can join and participate in these meetings, bring up issues that need to be addressed, and have the discussions and try to solve those problems and get the industry to move forward on them. How are we organized? Well, we have a diverse board. We require parties from different parts of the industry to be on the board. So we need payer representation and provider representation and clearinghouse representation. It is not all focused on one side, which makes us a little different than, say, the ADA or NADP, the National Association of Dental Plans, whose memberships focus on provider or payer and then have kind of affiliations with other parties. Everyone's still trying to solve issues. It's just who gets to be full membership and try to drive those forward. And so there's a lot of interaction on those. From an organization standpoint, we have two primary work groups, one towards education and one towards membership, in order to keep the organization going. And then we have four current focused work groups. The first is around eligibility and benefits and how to integrate that and describe benefits more accurately, so that when a payer is trying to describe the benefits to a provider, the provider understands and can use that data correctly. We have a focus group on remittance advice, and have worked towards bringing in new CARCs and RARCs and other guides on how to use the remittance to correctly describe, say, how to do an orthodontia payment over time. We have an AI process group how AI is impacting, and we'll get into that today. And we have one that's really focused on the all payer reporting requirements and database pieces, which dental is being pulled into, and particularly focused on the fact that many states have different reporting requirements and they're not all consistently using the same data sets. So how can we drive towards standardization in that process? So what has NDEDIC done in its 35 years? Early on, its actual first publication was a dental EDI primer in 1993 that said, where do I begin? This was the infancy of dental EDI that was out there and how to get people to move forward. Most recently, we've brought in things like our best practices for CARC and RARC mapping so that providers can understand what a payer is saying and that the provider can tell the payer, this is the way we need you to describe appropriately with CARCs and RARCs. The best practice guide on eligibility and benefits, also known as the top 50 or 56 questions that providers want answered, so that payers can say, if I do a single response to a benefit request, what information should I give back for providers to cut down the calls and need for additional information. We have a best practice guide around orthodontia claims. Orthodontia, it's generally submitted a single claim but gets paid out over multiple months or years. And so having a guide that tells you how to change that adjudication result and how much is paid and what's now due from the patient over time was the purpose of that guide. And then most recently from the AI group that we'll talk about, a claim review status annotation guide. And we'll go into that in a minute. So I wanted to talk a little bit about AI and perceptions and the industry as a whole. If we kind of look at how do providers look at payers, and it's probably not any different in medical than it is in dental. Here's my lovely AI generation of a visual representation of a dentist slaying the dragon. You're out here to take my treasure. You just don't want to pay me what you do. It's definitely something that's said from mostly out of ignorance, but definitely a deep feeling coming in from the provider side. And if you look at it from the payer side, it's like, oh, that dentist trying to pick my pocket a little more, and that we still need to control what we're spending in order to have benefits available for that patient throughout the year or throughout their life cycle, not just spend everything in January and then suddenly at the end of the year they need something and they have no benefits and now they delay treatment because they don't have at least partial benefits available. So let's talk a little bit about the provider and the payer and how they're using AI and why that's an issue here. If we look at providers, they're really trying to get out there and find treatment opportunities, ways that they can help the patient become a more whole and complete person and healthier. When we talk about payers, they define reimbursement criteria. They don't necessarily say you can't do this work, but they can say the benefits, the opportunity to reduce the costs and to control costs. This is our reimbursement requirements in order to do that. Unfortunately, treatment opportunities and reimbursement criteria aren't the same, right? And that's where we get into this conflict here. And in general, we find that because treatment opportunities and reimbursement criteria are not the same, it becomes a bunch of opportunities to attribute the other side malice in some way, right? Is this a billing mistake or is it truly fraud, waste, or abuse from a provider side? When a payer is looking at a provider. When the provider is looking at the payer, you've given me benefit ambiguity. I don't know what this means, so I can't tell the patient what you're going to pay and make sure that they get the treatment needed. And so it ends up causing a big lack of trust, right? And so when we look at the industry, trust is an issue. And when we go in and we start looking at these trends in artificial intelligence, where we're starting to use computer vision or other pieces that are out there, both sides are starting to use AI to help become more efficient at what they do. And those really lead to opportunities for both sides to start looking at the other side more deeply? Well, we need to have trust between the parties. I like to tell providers that, hey, if you don't trust the payer, why are you in the network? Well, I need the patients. Well, then you trust them to give you something. So you got to trust them at least in some portion. And you don't generally only take one payer, you trust more than one payer. And when I talk to a payer, it's like you don't only have one provider in the network that you trust. You have to trust a lot of providers. And so in doing so, you need to be able to build this trust bond between the parties here. And part of that is being able to have some transparency in this process. Well, we know that as AI comes in, particularly computer vision nowadays, we see a lot of diversity even among the same thing that's trying to be done. So you'll have the same type of thing where I'm going in and looking at an X-ray and trying to describe that X-ray. Well, different AI vendors will describe the X-ray in different ways. They will all measure things probably fairly similarly, but they're all different, right? And how do I, as a provider, trust a particular AI to work with it? Well, I have to use it. I have to get used to it, and I have to validate that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. And then a lot of times when somebody says, okay, I now trust this particular thing, that means it's a lower trust than all the other things that are out there that could do something similar. Well, we're in an industry that uses a wide variety of these pieces here. So now we have this issue where we have providers that are trying to use AI to do charting and treatment opportunity presentment and reimbursement criteria to try to figure out what a payer is doing from their benefit plans, what kind of benefit availability there is. And payers are starting to use it in terms of reimbursement criteria and print claim processing, and they've always done that, OCR lift. Well, now they're using AI to make sure they lifted better. COB and EOB processing, lifting that information up from previous adjudication results, and even looking at provider outlier behavior. Is this provider really doing what they're supposed to be doing? Those are all in there. Well, when we look at those parties, now we're wrapping each of those into AI. And we have a problem here because each party says we have more layers to get through to try to bring around trust. Well, we like to think that trust is really out there and saying, hey, we build trust by defining things that allow us to open up transparency and understand what's going on. And if we do so, then we can start trusting the party wherever they are in the ecosystem, right? If I am a payer and I use vendor A to help me look at X-rays with computer vision, and a provider is using vendor A for that same type of process, well, that lends its credence to saying maybe I trust that. But if the provider is using vendor B and I don't have any relationship with vendor B as a payer, do I trust what they're doing? Or do I think that maybe they're leaning more towards what a provider would want versus what I need as a payer in terms of benefit administration? And so from our AI charter standpoint, we said, well, how do we get out there and say, hey, there's a review process here that needs to occur when a claim is submitted. And when that claim is submitted, there's generally documentation. If we look at the dental industry, we're looking between 15 and 17% of all claims being submitted have an attachment sent with it. And many of those attachments are truly X-rays, not radiographic reports. It's a bit different than the medical industry that has a lot better coding related to ICDT and other processes that allow more summary information of reporting that comes through. But even on medical, there's quite a bit of attachment that's going on. But in dental, it's a high degree of attachments related to original source data, original X-rays that are coming through. So we said, well, if a review is going to happen, how do we go in and say that a review has been done? And so providers send this claim and attachment over. The payer may say, oh, well, I've done a review. That review could be manual. It could be AI driven. We don't particularly care. But if a payer receives the claim and they don't have the documentation they need and they go into review, there's a bunch of cost related to that, right? Now they have to go back out to the provider and ask for the information that's missing. If review could be done prior to that step, would that be helpful? And in doing so, who did that review, and do I trust that party that did that review? If that makes sense. So what we did was say, hey, let's work on a way to annotate a claim, to say that a review was done somewhere in this process, who did that performance, what was the summary results, so that the claim can be annotated in a way to allow us to say, you need to route it one way or another, payer, when it gets to your system. And so we have that summary recommendation. We also wanted to define mechanisms to return that the other way, that if review was done by a payer, sending it back to a provider, could we annotate a claim status or an ERA in a way that says this was reviewed and you should trust this party because this is the way we did it, not just it was a random denial type of process, right? And we wanted to make sure that this annotation mechanism didn't depend on AI alone, although AI is being used as kind of an impetus to move forward in this process. So we felt that transparency facilitates the trust and opens up the opportunities for multiple parties to become trusted parties within this ecosystem. So we focused on 4 specific workflows. Basically, does an assessment need to be performed or not? And can it be performed with an attachment, given attachment quality? Is it there? Is it what you need to look at? Clinical review. I've now looked at this attachment and it's met or has not met the criteria. And provider review. Is the provider sitting in some sort of outlier? Are they doing 3,000% more of a particular procedure than everybody around them? And why? Should we be looking deeper into that process? So when we looked at it and where this review can occur, it could be done at a provider's office, right? Let's say it's a dental service organization that has 30 locations. Maybe they have a dental director that's doing a review and using AI to review all of their offices. They could be doing this review, and this could be, did it meet criteria for reimbursability in this particular case? It could be done by an intermediary, like my own company as a clearinghouse. Could we implement validations and claim and clinical review processes as the claim comes through our system, and be able to annotate that claim before it gets to the payer? And the payer can, of course, do that review after it's received. Right now, almost all review is being done at the payer. So if they try to implement AI, they're generally doing one-off implementations. Every payer is doing an implementation with only one vendor. And now we have this, again, this trust piece. If payer is using vendor A versus vendor B and providers using vendor B, now there's not a trust. And so both sides are doing work, and we haven't reduced the administrative costs. For the overall, did we meet the criteria for reimbursability, particularly in this claim workflow? From the result types, we really basically said if the assessment was performed, the answers to that is either we've done it or we haven't, right? If there's an attachment quality, is it correct or incorrect in the set of data that's there? In clinical review, it meets the criteria that the clinic that is there for reimbursability, or it needs additional review. And this is a really big one when we talk about clinical review. AI at this point is not allowed to deny a claim for clinical necessity. They are allowed to say, yeah, it meets your criteria, or no, you should probably have a professional review it because it's outside of what we think meets the criteria. And then the whole provider side, are they an outlier, or can we bypass this process? When we get to the current status of what we've done, we've gone out and we've published a guide for claim annotation. And it reviews those scenarios. It assigns summary values that come out of that process. And we utilize the PWK segment to annotate the fact that who did it, what the results were, what the confidence level was in that result, and how to be able to give it identities in a way that allows you to go back and confirm that party did it. And that was really important to us as we talked about, if a provider sends in a PWK segment and they say, yeah, and it was reviewed by vendor A and they said it was good, how do we go back to vendor A and confirm that they actually did the work on that particular claim? So it was important to make sure that we had all of those pieces in that. And I'm not going to give you all the details there. You can buy the guide from NDEDIC. It's very cheap, or it's free as a member of NDEDIC. So either way, there's some benefit there to get into how do you annotate this claim. And the point of this is to allow the player, when it gets to their system, to route appropriately into the right work queues. If it meets all criteria and it has all the documentation necessary, does anybody really need to manually review it? If not, let's go into just getting into the adjudication process and go forward. So our next opportunities really are how to pilot with multiple parties. We're in the process of creating that pilot guide. We're looking at the 275 transaction for figuring out how we can annotate it. Once again, using the PWK segment should allow us to use that same type of annotation. This annotation was signed off by X12 and say, yep, it meets the criteria there, because it's not something that currently can be codified separately within the 835 guide. So it's just in addition to the general string that's being sent in the PWK segment. And we're looking at the 835. How can we try to figure out how to annotate coming back that a review was performed and who did that review, so that a provider can say, oh, it was done and I trust it. Do I really need to file an appeal, or do I always file an appeal because I didn't get my way? Well, if they can start seeing the trust factor and say, yep, they used the same thing that I did, and yeah, you're right, I should have appropriately talked to my patient about the cost difference in this reimbursement process. And we're talking about a registry to be able to help identify who the reviewers are, to make it easy rather than everybody creating a new standard as to how to describe themselves. How can we look at a registry to help get those that are doing review identified? Right. And so the whole goal, again, is that we have providers with their AI and we have payers with their AI. We've introduced more parties to this process, but what we're trying to do through transparency is build trust between the parties and actually, hopefully, reduce the costs in the system to actually doing this process and using these mechanisms appropriately. So if for those of you who thought, hey, this is going to be the cool new AI, this is really the weeds where we're saying, how do we make sure that parties understand that AI was involved, that criteria were met, and that we can actually take advantage of this process in a workflow that reduces costs and increases auto adjudication rates? What can you do to participate? If you want to learn more, please join NDEDIC. It's ndedic.org. Nick has thrown in a link I see on the chat on NDEDIC and its work groups. We generally have an annual summit. This year it's in the end of April, and it'll be in Omaha, Nebraska, for those that don't get to visit Omaha very much. We try to keep it fairly cheap in the venues so that people can get in and participate and share easily. And we know that every company's time and money is valuable. And so we believe that for organizations such as WEDI that have that same type of effort going to saying, how do we actually use interoperability and transactions in a way to truly get to the goal of administrative simplification and reduction of costs in this overall system? We'd love to have you join. And that is my primary presentation. What can I do? Questions?
Hey, thanks, Tom. We really appreciate getting that update. And I love the focus on using transparency to build trust, because I know, from a technologist perspective, we sometimes think we should be able to just treat these systems like black boxes and only care about the transactions going in and out. But, as with any new technology, people are naturally a little bit apprehensive. So if you can peel back the covers a little bit and let them know what's going on, inside the black box a little bit, it helps to establish some level of confidence and know that you're not trying to put one over on them. And I also, by the way, as an X12 member, I appreciate you guys did the right thing to get approval to use the PWK segment, because I know we've seen other trading partners do kind of, weird, unapproved things in that area. So
Yeah,
thanks
no,
for
that's
that.
spent a long time in X12 and definitely want to use it where we can. Um, and EDI is in the message of NDEDIC and has been for 35 years. Although we believe we're going to start moving it to enhanced data interactions rather than electronic data interchange, because there's a lot of other mechanisms now that are opportunities to solve problems there. But we definitely welcome questions there. I know that, for instance, in parallel with this particular effort from NDEDIC, a couple of opportunities were opened up with the Dental Standards Institute to try to create a mechanism to say, hey, payer, if you would like to describe your adjudication rules or your benefit administrative rules, here's how you can do it. And then if a review is done, here's how you can report it in a consistent manner to align it with the rules, so that we can get some consistency in reporting across this mechanism. Because when I've talked to payers, it's like, okay, great, I'll use AI. And now I'm going to review every claim that comes in. And now providers are like, hey, this always got paid before. What's going on? And so that black box that we talked about becomes a larger black box and a bigger impact, and reduces that trust. But if we can open up that transparency, it's definitely appropriate there.
Yeah, great. Yeah, even if the payers or health plans still have different coverage rules or limits, if they sort of report those and communicate them in a consistent way, it makes things a lot easier for the providers.
Yep, agreed. I think we got a question in the chat here. What are the technologies or standards beyond EDI that the dental industry is evaluating? Well, EDI in the dental industry has been very geared towards the reimbursement process, right? Claims, submission, the ERA, which is still a highly underutilized transaction within the dental industry. And that there are a lot of states that are now starting to push out there and say there needs to be API versions of things that are out there, not just X12 EDI standards, whether that's eligibility and benefits or transactions to support the movement of referrals or other information that needs to occur. So there's definitely parties that are trying to use FHIR standards and with HL7. And it's still kind of in the wild, wild west again, where people are coming out with their own APIs and trying to come in and say, well, if they're trying to solve a problem, how do we bring it in and at least try to get it as a standard problem solved? And so there's definitely components to that. I think we've struggled a bit in not being able to get the EDI transactions updated in 20 years. In that, in dental, maybe more so than medical, has been ahead of the curve in a lot of ways, and yet underutilized as well. So, for instance, the 837D has had a predetermination transaction in it from its beginning. That is something that should have been in place for medical in order to support the whole No Surprises Act, right? How to do these treatment planning pieces. And yet dental has always had it. And now there's kind of pushes to say, well, maybe you need to be using the different transactions that medical uses. It's like, no, the industry already has something that works well. And for instance, with NDEDIC coming out with the EDI guide related to the top 56 questions that a provider asks about eligibility and benefits, we created a structure on how to give information back in the eligibility transaction. But the provider has generally had to take on the role of doing estimations, and EDI eligibility is incomplete for being able to do an accurate estimation, particularly things like last treatment and the need to be able to get down to specific anatomy. So did I have this done on this tooth? I can't currently do it, although I know EDI has has tried to get that in there. We just haven't been able to move the industry to using it. So there's a lot of pieces that are being augmented outside of EDI that hopefully will get into EDI as we move forward. But those are the pieces that are there.
Yeah, I know that the X12 version 8060 transactions, especially for, 270, 271 for eligibility and benefits, do include a number of enhancements specifically targeted at the dental space. So hopefully that gets
Yeah,
pick it up as a CMS adopted standard soon. That would, certainly help, I think.
I absolutely agree. I also think we need to be careful of and that the dental industry needs to be more vocal when new ideas of how to raise the level of usability for the medical side ends up becoming a barrier to the usability in dental. So an example on that, many years ago, um, when it was under 4010 even, a particular dental payer would return back benefits for both in and out of network. And they used a lot of in and out of network information. And they said, okay, I'm going to send you the in network if I recognize you as in network first, and I'll send you the out of network if we recognize you as in network second, or vice versa, depending on that order there. When the extension to try to get more information into the standard on medical came out, people started doing less work because they had a really nice answer, and then they went to, well, I need to be compliant, so they cut some of that down. And so we got to be careful on trying to raise the level and not discouraging those that were using it deeper. So I believe Robert brought up a question. How are dental-specific PMS, EHR software vendors reacting to these new technologies, and how can ONC certification potentially assist in this area? I think there's how do I say this? I think it's still kind of the Wild West. It's every practice management system, EHR, in the moment is still trying to figure out what do they want to implement and how do they want to implement it, and then trying to work with a party that will make it easy for them to do so. I know that right now, for instance, eligibility and benefits, because so much of the estimation is put onto the provider, the need to push for RPA processes to look at payers' websites to get more information versus what's in the EDI has really come up. And so most of the PMSs are saying, well, hey, vendor, can you do this for me? And they're working positively in that. When it comes to really kind of the fire standards, some of them jumped into things quickly and then didn't see enough industry movement. And so they've actually backed off of it. That was a particular case, I believe, with, say, Open Dental. They still have a fire integration, but most parties aren't using a fire integration. So they're looking for additional ways to get data moved around. And I'd have to say that at least one party that had certification for their product has actually stepped out of that certification because there wasn't, they potentially said, oh, there's other things that could be put in place and restricted on us versus being able to use that. So I'm sure there's ways to get into it better. And I think as an industry, we need to be able to move forward on that in a way that's encouraging for the standards.
And Tom, if I can
Please.
ask a little follow-up on that, and correct me if I'm wrong here. It's been a while since I looked at the ASTP or ONC Health IT certification criteria, but as I recall, there was really little or nothing in there for the dental use cases. Is that still true?
Yeah, it's still true. Even certification for CAQH, you write off a lot of dental use cases, I mean, or medical use cases for it. I know when we did originally for eligibility and benefits at our company, I think we ended up cutting out 95% of the test cases because they just weren't relevant, and they didn't really have the breadth on that. I think they've added a few more recently, but it's interesting out there. Next question. In the healthcare space, Many have big hopes about AI helping find cures for cancer, dementia, and more. Any big AI hopes or on the dental side? There is definitely a push on this side in order to get people to do treatment. And the linkage between dental health and medical health, the whole body health, has really started being driven home. And so in that, the efforts to be able to say, hey, 3D, CBCT scans of the head being done for mouth and jaw pieces are also picking up potentially cancer in the back of the throat or in the brain, even if the scan is wide enough. And so a number of parties are actually using a third party surgery, medical side review of those same CBCT images and review of that to say, hey, there's a larger systemic issue going on here that we need to look at.
Thank you. That was my question. And actually, I was kind of wondering about the answer you just gave. I actually worked for 2 years at the Dental Network of America.
Uh-huh.
And we did a dental health wellness program, which I actually administered from a technical aspect. And I thought it was great. It was basically making sure that people got the dental health needs taken care of, be it cleanings or whatever else, because it has a whole body impact. And it
Huge.
affects a lot of different conditions, diabetes, heart disease, women with pregnancies can benefit from cleanings. And it's not something widely done, but it's something I've been hoping more in the industry do. And I'm hoping for AI opening up more possibilities and making people more efficient. That
Yep.
the extra efficiency frees up resources to do something like that. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's a great question. And even some recent things in terms of reimbursability on the Medicaid, the Medicare side is starting to get into this. Well, providers will start to be able to say oral health and general health is tied together and start getting reimbursability on that. That'll be great.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can say myself that years ago, just even going to my dentist, they started taking my blood pressure. And they were like, wait a second, your blood pressure's off the charts at the moment. Are you okay? It's like, well, I did just drive from Orange County to Riverside in California on the 91 freeway at 4 o'clock to try to make this appointment. So it might be a little high. But not a week later, my blood pressure went up and I had a major event and ended up, if I hadn't known that for my dentist taking my blood pressure, I probably would have ignored that and had a larger issue. So just even being able to have that cross chance that I'm going to see my dentist twice as often as I'm going to see my primary care physician for just a wellness check. Being able to tie those together is huge. Arna, we're also using radiography to detect oral airway obstructions using computer vision in addition to cancer screening. Absolutely. Other questions? Other topics. I mean, we can definitely talk. NDEDIC is really geared towards being in the industry, like WEDI, on saying how do we move data, how do we get the right communication to not make it the Wild West of communications. Right? Everybody getting their own piece reduces the trust, increases the costs in the industry.
And again, if you do have a question, feel free to type it in the chat, or I think you can ask to unmute if you want to ask out loud.
Any thoughts on moving more dentists to EFT? Everybody has those thoughts. I'm actually in a fairly unique position where I worked and built the primary competitor to my current company on clearinghouses in the dental market. And I'm amazed at how few parties actually use the ERA and the tie of EFT to that. Dentist, the small practice, really likes to have that piece of paper. And so much so that the virtual card is actually fairly significantly used successfully in distribution, which is also surprising. But it's definitely uh, I think a couple of barriers that could help move this, that I've started as at NDEDIC and talking to payer members that are there. The artificial barrier we put in place of the creation of the 835 tied to an enrollment process and to turn the paper off, I think really has led to providers not trusting the data that's in the 835. It's hard for them to take what had been 2 or 3,000 distinct reason codes from a payer on the dental side and bring them into 30 or 40 CARC and RARCs to understand why something was not adjudicated the way they expected it to be adjudicated. And so I've encouraged payers to start sending me an 835 for every provider, every claim, independent of how the provider actually wants to get paid or see that data, so that we can start building a trust and a feedback mechanism for the payer as to how to be more transparent and clear on the ERA. And if we can drive ERA, then EFT, I think, goes along with it. Once you separate it, and it's always, I think, been a challenge, once you separate the payment from the description of the payment, you now have a reconciliation process. And most practice management systems are not good at that reconciliation, bringing that data together. So they're using a third party solution to try to bring that together to reconcile. Well, it's a lot easier if it's a piece of paper for both to be able to reconcile that for the office. And that just works in the practice management system. Arna, how do you see AI enabling imaging software playing in the claims attachment space? So what is interesting is that's part of the reason we were talking about this particular transparency piece and the way to annotate a claim in this workflow. So AI enabled imaging software, where it's most of those parties have focused on either the provider side or the payer side. And treatment opportunity is not the same thing as reimbursement policy, right? It's not that the payer says you can't do this particular procedure. It's that it's not part of the coverage, or it's not paid at the rate that you think it is for reimbursement. And so very few of the AI vendors that are dealing with looking at images from a claims attachment standpoint, which is generally the provider side, truly understand what is necessary for the reimbursement side on the payer. Part of that is that the payers don't want to be completely transparent, and that we're trying to encourage that with ways to do so. And part of that is because the AI at the desktop for the provider is geared towards trying to find disease detection and treatment needs, and that they are helping that provider diagnose better. And the AI on the other side for the payer is really looking for specific things for reimbursability. Right? Now, do I see those becoming closer? Yes, I do. But for the most part, at least in the dental industry, dental attachments have been traditionally in what we call a data warehouse, or an image warehouse. So at my company at Vine, NEA historically had come out in the early 90s and created the attachment warehouse when images were expensive to store. And so payers have built their workflows to say, I don't need to store the images. I need to just see this data on demand as I get a claim in. Now, how did that attachment get created? The attachment gets created from the raw images or screenshots of the original system. AI-enabled systems, providers are starting to say, hey, I feel like when I send the X-ray and an annotated X-ray that has this AI overlay, I get better reimbursement, or a more consistent reimbursement coming from the payer. I can't necessarily attribute that to the AI itself in the image being sent to the payer, but I do believe that it's a mix of both, some of that from the payer side and some of that the provider is just being better at diagnosing what they need to do and having the better treatment planning. So they become a better diagnostician, if that makes sense. So that's where I kind of see it at the moment. I don't think we have a good way of measuring how much that has changed. I know there's a lot of perception from the providers that if I send an annotated image, I get a better result. I don't know that it is the case from the actual annotated image versus if you send only an annotated image to a payer, they're going to reject it. They want the original. They don't want the annotated. They don't mind an annotated, but you've got to give them the original so that they can make that same diagnostic decision. All right. 8060 version of the 835 has new remark code set geared towards industries like dental and P&C. Yes, I believe that that is the case. And we would love to get that towards adoption for sure and drive those things. Yes, the WEDI subwork group. Dental EDI Council. Yeah, I know that I had been part of the dental subwork group. Man, it almost feels like 10 years ago now, and it's possible it was 10 years ago. And we focused heavily on the real-time claim submission process of being able to submit an 837D and return back an 835 as the recommended result. In fact, in the dental industry, at least at my company, over 20% of the claims that we submit to a payer are going to a payer in real time with an adjudication result about 90% of the time. But the other 10% of the time that it doesn't come back as a result is because they want to do a review for this clinical need. So they're looking at an attachment. And AI will help drive that to being done quickly. If we can do that review before the claim is submitted, now the payer can say, well, 60% of claims that I was reviewing didn't need to be reviewed. They met my criteria. If AI can take that load off and say those 60% can just auto adjudicate, that'd be huge. I'd love to help you, Arna. Need a co-chair. Interesting. Yeah, right now I'm the chair of the board at NDEDIC, the co-chair of Workgroup 3, which is our AI work group. And I've now been put into this new effort, which I think, Arna, you might be part of on I can't even remember the name, the group name now. That's really trying to work towards interoperability between medical dental and dental and patient information going out. So maybe I can find you somebody to help from our team. All righty. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, I appreciate the opportunity, Nick, that you reached out and said, hey, what's NDEDIC doing and how can we help? I think together, both NDEDIC and WEDI have the same goals. How do we get information out to the right parties to start moving this efficiently and accurately, and truly get the benefits of the EDI transaction moving?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Tom. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak with us today.
Absolutely.
So I think that's all the questions, unless there is anybody final. But Michael, do you want to close us out here?
There we go.
Sure
Your
thing.
help highlights. Yep.
Sure thing, Tom. Thank you very much. Once again, for the folks who are not members of the Emerging Technology Workgroup Spotlight, Emerging Technology Workgroup, please contact Ariana Poole at apoole@wedi.org. Thank you very much, and be sure to visit wedi.org and check out our calendar for our upcoming educational offerings. Have a great day.